Chapter 13. The Wedding Day. On the day of his wedding, Guy was waiting in the church with his friend, Bob Treacher, for Anne to arrive. "Did you bring any whiskey, Bob?" Guy asked. "I need a drink." "Oh, yes," Bob said. "I forgot. Here you are." He gave Guy the bottle with a smile. Guy opened the bottle and put it on a table. After a few seconds, he picked it up and threw it against the wall. Broken glass and whiskey spread all over the floor. Guy stood with his back to Bob. "I'm very sorry, Bob," he said. "It's all right, Guy," he said. "You're nervous." "No, I'm not nervous," Guy thought. When are they going to stop this wedding? When are they all going to know about me? This is worse than the murder. I'm lying to Anne, but only she can save me. Guy could not stop the wedding. It was like the murder of Bruno's father. Guy felt he was an actor in a bad play, doing something he had done thousands of times before. At the party afterwards, Guy suddenly saw Bruno's face, smiling madly. Then it disappeared. "Congratulations, Guy!" People were all shouting at the same time. "Good luck, Guy and Anne!" The noise got louder and louder. "Good luck! Good luck! Guy and Anne!" "Good luck, Guy! I really want you and Anne to be happy as I am." And there was that soft voice and that weak face with the mad red eyes in it, and Bruno's hand was on Guy's shoulder, and he was looking at Anne. "Go away," Guy whispered. "You mustn't come here." "Are you a relation of Teddy Faulkner?" Bruno asked Anne. He shook her hand. "He's my cousin," Anne said. "We play tennis sometimes," Bruno said. "Are you a friend of Guy's?" Anne asked. Bruno laughed. "Friend? I'm only his oldest friend in the world. We went to school together." He put his arm around Guy's shoulder. "Didn't we, Guy?" "You never told me about that man, Guy," Anne said later. "We didn't really go to school together, Anne," Guy said quickly. I met him at the Parker Institute. It was last December." "Can't you see?" Guy thought as he looked at all the people in the room who were speaking to Bruno. "Can't you see he's mad?" Chapter 14. Guy's Secret Brother. Guy took a job with the company Horton, and Keese, architects. They gave him a big shop to build. It was easy to do, nothing special. Anyone could do it. He and Anne had their first party at the house soon after their wedding. "Bruno's coming to the party," Anne told Guy. "Why?" Guy said. "He isn't my friend." Bruno was drunk when he arrived. He looked at Anne all the time. "I like your dress, Anne," he said. Bruno always noticed women's clothes. "Now, where will you go for your first holiday? Italy? You know, Anne, Guy and I always talked about traveling." Guy took Bruno to the corner of the room. "Get out now," he said, "or I'll kill you." "Is that a promise, Guy?" Bruno laughed. "You know, Guy, I think Anne is very beautiful. I like it here." An hour later he fell behind the sofa, completely drunk, and went to sleep. "He can stay the night," Anne said. "Where did you find him, Guy?" a man asked. "They won't let him into our club anymore." A few days later, Bruno sent flowers to Anne to say sorry for being so drunk at the party. "Aren't they nice?" she said to Guy. "I think Bruno's interesting." Horton, and Keese liked Guy's drawings for the shop. Guy hated them. This was the kind of ordinary work he didn't want to do. He wanted to leave the company, although they wanted him to do more work. But there was something much worse than this. A normal man could build a bad shop or a good hospital, but Guy wasn't normal. Sometimes he looked in a mirror and saw the other man who was inside him, the murderer, his secret brother. The telephone rang, and Guy's secretary picked it up. "A man wants to speak to you, Mr. Haynes," she said. "Hello, Guy," Bruno said. "Come to lunch." Guy couldn't argue with Bruno in front of the secretary, and he agreed to meet Bruno at a restaurant 10 minutes later. Bruno had 4 expensive ties, which he showed Guy. "They're for you, Guy," he said. "Do you like them?" He was like a lover. "Anne spoke to me on the phone this morning," Bruno said. "She told me you're both going on a trip. She's a great woman, Guy. You must be very happy." For a moment, Bruno wanted to hold Guy's hand, like a brother. "Yes, I am," Guy said, "very lucky." "What does Anne like doing, Guy?" Bruno asked. "Does she like me?" "You've never loved a woman, have you?" Guy said. "You don't know what love is, do you?" Bruno looked at the table. "No," he said. "You give me ties," Guy said. "But you could give me to the police in the same way." "Oh, Guy!" Bruno started crying. "I have to go," Guy said. He jumped up and ran out of the restaurant. "Why do people do this to me?" Bruno thought. "Why? Why?" "How do you know Guy Haynes's wife?" Gerard asked Bruno. He had all Bruno's bills, and he had seen the one for the flowers Bruno sent to Anne. "I'm a friend of her husband," Bruno said. "Mother and I were thinking of building a house. He's an architect." "Why did you send Mrs. Haynes flowers?" Gerard asked. "You must know them very well." "No, I went to a party there, and I had a good time." "Let's talk about all these men you know," Gerard said. "Matt Levine, Mark Lev, you saw a lot of them before the murder." "Yeah, and Mark killed his own father, too," Bruno said. "Ernie Schroeder?" Gerard asked. "Charlie, please." Bruno tried to think of something to say. Chapter 15. Proof. Guy went on a sailing holiday with Anne on her boat, the India. They were away from home for 3 weeks. Guy was happy and calm. He looked at the clear sky and the blue sea, and the sea made him think of the bridge he wanted to build, a long, white bridge like a pair of wings. He wanted to be a great architect. Guy saw Anne looking at him with love in her eyes, and he felt all the bad times were gone. A few days later, the phone rang at his home. "Hello, Mr. Haynes," a man said. "This is Arthur Gerard. I'm a detective. Could I come to talk to you at your house, please? Now." Guy had to say yes, and Gerard came over quickly. "Do you know Charles Bruno, Mr. Haynes?" he asked. "Yes, I know him," Gerard said. "His father was murdered in March." "I didn't know that," Anne said, and looked at Guy in surprise. "Neither did I," Guy said quickly. "Murdered?" "When and where did you meet Charles Bruno, Mr. Haynes?" Gerard asked. At the Parker Institute last December," Guy said. He only said it because he had told Anne that at the wedding, when she asked him about Bruno. Why hadn't he and Bruno planned a story? "When did you see Mr. Bruno again?" Gerard asked. "At my wedding in June," Guy said. "And he came to a party in July, didn't he, Mrs. Haynes?" Gerard asked Anne. "Yes," she answered. "Do you like him?" Gerard asked, smiling. Anne looked at his smile. She didn't like it. "Well enough," she said finally. Gerard asked them a few more questions, and then he left. "Does Gerard think Bruno murdered his father?" Anne asked Guy later. "He probably thinks it's one of Bruno's friends," Guy said. "But it was me, Anne. It was me," he thought. "You never know what people are really doing, do you?" Anne said, shaking her head in surprise. Later in the day, Bruno came to the house. "You're drunk," Guy said. "Get out." "Perhaps we should get a taxi for you," Anne said. Bruno fell against Guy. He was saying the same thing again and again. "I'll tell her. I'll tell her. I'll—" "What?" Anne asked Guy. "What's he saying?" "Nothing," Guy said. "I'll put him to bed." Guy pulled Bruno out of the room and took him to a bedroom. Bruno slept for several hours, and when he woke up, Guy was with him. "Bruno, listen to me. Did you tell Gerard we met in December, at the Parker Institute?" Guy asked. "Yeah, I said that," Bruno said. "Can I have a drink? Look, Gerard thinks this friend of mine, Matt Levine, murdered my father. He's already killed 2 or 3 men. "I won't let another man take the blame for the murder," Guy said. "He won't get the blame," Bruno said. "Gerard won't find anything about Matt Levine or us. There's no proof. Will you go now?" "No," Bruno said quietly. "I want to be with you and Anne." And Guy knew that he hated Bruno but liked him at the same time. "You know, Guy, I like you, but you're in more trouble than me," Bruno said. "Our servants saw you that night. Anne saw those scratches on your face, and there's the gun, the gloves. The police could ask you some very difficult questions." "But what have they got about me and Miriam, Guy? Tell me, Guy, what have they got?" Guy and Anne were on the India. The sky was gray, and the air was hot. Guy held his little gun in his pocket. "Why is Bruno so interested in you?" Anne asked Guy. "He's got nothing to do," Guy said. His hand tightened round the gun. "And you met him at the Institute?" she asked. "Yes." Guy looked into the water. "Why is she asking all these questions?" he thought. "She knows something is wrong. She knows I'm lying, but she doesn't know about what." Guy heard Anne walk away. He quickly took his gun out of his pocket and dropped it into the sea. "What was that?" Anne was standing behind him. He could think of nothing to say to her. Chapter 16. Gerard Comes Closer. "Ma, I don't feel good." Bruno was in his mother's bedroom. He walked very slowly into her bathroom and got the bottle of whiskey he had hidden there, but he dropped it on the floor. He couldn't control his hands. "Charlie?" his mother said, and looked worried. "I can't breathe, Ma." He tore his clothes off. "Oh, God!" "I'll get a doctor," his mother said. "No, they'll take me away," he screamed. "Look at my hands, Ma." His middle fingers were bent tightly inside his hand. He couldn't stop it. He couldn't move them. "Look, Ma!" "Charlie!" his mother shouted. Bruno fell to the floor. He couldn't speak normally. Then a doctor came and gave Bruno some medicine, and he went to sleep. "The drink is killing him," the doctor told Bruno's mother. "He must stop." Bruno woke up later and saw Gerard standing near the bed. "I'm sorry to wake you," Gerard said with his stupid smile, "but I found something. Remember this?" He threw Guy's book onto the bed. "I remember," Bruno said. "I got this book at the Hotel La Fonda. It's Haynes's book. You met him 18 months ago on the train to Santa Fe, didn't you?" Gerard said. "No," Bruno said. "I found the book on the train, that's all. I wanted to send it to Guy, but I lost it. I met him in December." "So you made calls to Metcalf 18 months ago, and you didn't even know Mr. Haynes?" Gerard asked. "I found the phone bills." "Yeah, I phoned about the book," Bruno said angrily. "And you called before the murder, but you didn't call after," Gerard said. "Why not?" "I don't know," Bruno shouted. "I'm tired of murder." "Oh, I believe that," Gerard said. "I believe that." A few moments later, Guy had a phone call from Bruno in his office. "Gerard knows about the book, and the phone calls I made to Metcalf," Bruno said very quietly, as if someone was listening. "But I told him the calls were about the book, and we met in December. All right?" "All right," Guy said, and put the phone down. Gerard was coming closer and closer, but he couldn't stop it. He looked at the letter lying next to the phone. It was from his friend, Bob Treacher, in Canada. "I have an important job in Alberta. I want you to build a bridge for me as soon as possible. Right now. Bob." "Nobody knows who murdered Guy Haynes's first wife, Miriam," Gerard said to Bruno in his office. "I know," Bruno said. "Did you talk to Guy about Miriam? You're interested in murder," Gerard said. "I didn't talk to him about it," Bruno said. "Do you think he planned it?" Gerard asked. "No, I don't," Bruno said angrily. "You obviously don't know the type of man Guy Haynes is. He's a great architect." Gerard suddenly called out, "Come in, please, Mr. Haynes." He saw Bruno jump with surprise as Guy walked into the room. "Did you and Charles ever talk about your wife's murder, Mr. Haynes?" Gerard asked. "No," Guy said. "Did he ever tell you he wanted to murder his father?" Gerard asked. He had that slow, stupid smile on his face. "No," Guy said. Gerard held up Guy's book. "Charles found this on the train. But you didn't meet on the train, did you?" "No," Guy said. "The waiter who brought dinner to the two of you in Charles's room on the train says you did, Mr. Haynes," Gerard said, looking into Guy's eyes all the time. Guy felt hot with shame. He couldn't speak. "So what?" Bruno said angrily. "So why are you both lying?" Gerard asked. "Your wife was murdered, Mr. Haynes, a few days after you two met, and your father was murdered a few months later, Charles. Did you plan something?" "We planned nothing," Guy said. "Did Charles tell you he wanted his father dead, Mr. Haynes? Perhaps you were frightened to tell me about it?" Gerard asked. "No," Guy said. He felt himself going deeper and deeper into his own lies. And when would Gerard find out the truth? Did he know it already? Bruno and Guy left the office together. "You know," Bruno said, "he's looking for other people. Gerard doesn't think we did it. We had no reason to do it, did we?" Gerard went to see Anne at home late one autumn afternoon. "I think," he said, "that Charles Bruno told your husband about this plan to murder his father, and your husband didn't want to talk about it. Then, if your husband knew Miriam might die too, they had a kind of secret, didn't they?" "Guy couldn't do a thing like that," Anne said. "Do you think they met in March when Charles's father died and you don't know about it?" Gerard asked. "It's possible," Anne said, but she didn't know why she said it. When was that fight, she thought? February? March? And was it with Bruno? That was it. Guy tried to stop Bruno killing his father. "How was your husband in March, Mrs. Haynes?" Gerard asked. "He was nervous," she said. "It was a difficult time. His work." She stopped speaking. Gerard looked at her. Then he smiled and said, "Call me if you think of anything you know, Mrs. Haynes," and left quietly. A few minutes later, Anne saw Gerard outside the house, sitting in his car and writing notes. "Why did I say that about March? Is he writing about that?" she thought. "Gerard was here," Anne said that night as soon as Guy came home. "He wanted to know about March, if you knew Bruno had planned his father's murder for that month." Guy poured a glass of whiskey. Then he heard himself saying, "Look, Anne, Bruno told me on the train that he wanted his father dead. I'm not going to say anything, because the police can use that to hang an innocent man." Anne said gently, "Yes, what you're doing is right." And she smiled. "It's terrible, isn't it? Murder." Guy hated his lies. He felt empty inside. He thought he was worse than Bruno, who was honestly bad. Even if he was never caught, he couldn't live with Anne like this. Chapter 17. The Perfect Crime. Gerard smiled happily at Chief of Police Phil Dowland and said, "Can't you guess?" "About Samuel Bruno's murder?" Dowland asked. "You think his son Charles did it, don't you?" He didn't like Gerard because he was a private detective, and he didn't work by police rules. "No." Gerard's smile grew wider. "But I think he did another murder. Do you know Guy Haines?" "Yes," Dowland said. "His wife was murdered last June." "Guy Haines and Charles Bruno met on a train to Santa Fe 10 days before Miriam Haines died," Gerard said. "You think Bruno killed her?" Dowland asked. "You've got no proof." "Yes, I have," Gerard said happily. "I've spoken to a friend of Bruno's, Edward Wilson, who saw him going to the railway station in Santa Fe on the day of Miriam's murder, a taxi driver in Metcalfe who drove Bruno to the amusement park the very night Miriam Haines died, and a man he tried to buy whiskey from near the amusement park, and another taxi driver who saw him too. And I've got bills of phone calls Bruno made to Metcalfe." "But why did Bruno murder this woman?" Dowland said, laughing. "Because he met her husband on a train?" "No," Gerard said. "You don't see, do you? It was a plan. Bruno wanted Guy to kill his father, and he did." "Guy Haines?" Dowland shouted. "Oh, this is—" "Yes, Guy Haines," Gerard said. "He didn't want to, but he had to after Bruno murdered his wife. Guy was frightened. It was all Bruno's idea, the perfect crime. There was no reason for Guy and Bruno to murder these two people. They thought the police could never find them." "What happens now?" Dowland asked. "I'm going on holiday," Gerard said. "I want to check some more details about Guy Haines. I can wait a few weeks." Chapter 18. A Terrible Accident. Guy was living in Canada and building his bridge. He came home one weekend and saw a mess in the house only one person could make. "Bruno was here," he said. "Yes," Anne said. "You know he's mad, don't you?" Guy said. Anne didn't answer, and Guy looked at her carefully. Anne thought, "I know he's the one who wrote that letter to me in March, and the one you had a fight with. I know there's something—" Then she said, "Guy, I'm going to have a baby. Are you pleased?" "A baby?" Guy said, and he laughed with happiness. The next day, Bob Treacher came from Canada to stay with Guy and Anne. It was a sunny day, and the police had called to say that they had no more questions for Guy and Bruno about his father's murder. Anne was pregnant. He had a good job. He felt his life was changing, and all the bad things were in the past. The phone rang, and Anne answered. "Oh, hello," she said. "Yes, come with us. We'll meet you by the boat." She said to Guy, "That was Bruno. He's coming with us on the India today." And suddenly Guy felt everything seemed black again. It always came back. They stopped for a friend of Anne's, Helen Hayburn, on the way to the boat, and Bruno was waiting for them when they arrived. Bruno was very excited. "Come on, Guy," he shouted. "This is a great day. We've won." "Won what?" Anne asked, and Guy went cold inside. He looked at Bruno. "Have a drink," said Bruno, offering Anne his bottle of whiskey. "No, thank you," she said. "Come on, everybody," Bruno shouted. "Let's go!" The boat moved quickly over the grey sea, and the wind was quite strong. Bruno ran about the boat. "Sit down," Bob said. "Who are you?" Bruno asked drunkenly. "A friend of Guy's?" "Yes," Bob said politely. "I've known Guy all his life," Bruno shouted. "Have you?" Guy saw Anne look at him with surprise. Every time with Bruno, something bad happened. When will he say it? Guy thought. The truth. He could say anything, do anything, for the rest of my life. "Come on, let's sing," Bruno said. "Guy, sing with me." "Oh, sit down," Helen said to Bruno. "Yes, sit down," Guy said, "and keep quiet." Bruno started to cry. They didn't want him. He tried to walk away from all of them, even Guy. Suddenly, a large wave came up and hit the boat hard. The wave covered Bruno, and with a scream he fell into the sea. "Bruno!" Guy shouted. He jumped into the sea. It was very cold, and the waves seemed to be as high as mountains. He saw Bruno's head very far away. "Guy!" Bruno called once. A dying man. Guy swam towards the place where he had seen Bruno. Then he dived down into the cold grey water. The sea turned him round and round and round. There was nothing. Guy could see nothing. He was the loneliest man in the world. Where was his friend, his brother?
The Real Aunt Molly. My Aunt Molly is the kindest, sweetest person on earth. She may not be the cleverest woman in the world, but I love her a lot. However, a strange thing happened to Aunt Molly, and now we don't know what to do. It all started when her husband, Uncle Dalton, died. Well, I called him Uncle Dalton, but he always called him Sally. He was my mother's only brother. Aunt Molly really loved him. We all knew that. Life had been quite difficult for Aunt Molly when she was a child. She was poor, and her parents had died early on. She was left to look after herself. She'd never learned to read properly, and left school at an early age. But she was always cheerful and honest, and never complained about the hard work she did to earn her living. She worked as a cleaner, wherever there was work to do. She liked cleaning, because she didn't have to make any difficult decisions. Aunt Molly didn't like making decisions. Perhaps she wasn't used to it. I don't know. But everybody liked her, and she was never out of work. She met Uncle Dalton when she was working as a cleaner at the bus station. He was a bus driver, and it was when he had just finished for the day that he first saw her, cleaning the station office. He fell in love with her as soon as he saw her. It was the same for Aunt Molly. As soon as their eyes met, it was love for both of them. He soon grew to love her gentleness, and she loved his kind heart and willingness to make decisions. They got married 2 weeks later. A year after that, he gave birth to twin boys. They were my cousins, and their names were Winston and Clement. I was born in the same year, 2 months later. I was called Rufus. I still am. Anyway, Uncle Dalton got a better job at the bus station soon afterwards, and they bought a house near us. Aunt Molly and Uncle Dalton had a happy marriage. Uncle Dalton earned the money, and Aunt Molly cooked, cleaned, and made the house a wonderful home for her dear Dally and the boys. It wouldn't be quite right to say that Aunt Molly actually ran the house. In fact, all the big decisions were left to Uncle Dalton. But he made sure that everything went smoothly. Everybody was happy. I was happy too, because I liked to play with my cousins. I also looked forward to the delicious homemade biscuits Aunt Molly always gave me. My cousins and I were 5 years old when Uncle Dalton was run over by a bus at the station. It was an accident. Uncle Dalton didn't know what hit him, and he was killed immediately. Well, I suppose he guessed it was a bus, but I don't think he had much time to think it over, if you see what I mean. Anyway, he was dead. In a way, once Uncle Dalton had died, I think a part of Aunt Molly died too. She was still a hard worker and remained a good mother to Winston and Clement. Indeed, the routine of running the house was something she no longer needed any help with. My parents and Uncle Dalton's parents, my grandparents, all helped Aunt Molly with the decision-making. But the cheerfulness that we'd come to expect from her had gone. It was as if all her cheerfulness had died with Uncle Dalton, her dear Dally. He got some money from the bus company, because Uncle Dalton had been killed at work. At least he didn't have to leave the twins in order to earn money. Life continued. The twins grew into fine boys. But by the time they were 14, they wanted to see a bit more of the world outside their comfortable home. Both of them were bright and interested in the world outside, especially Winston. They were beginning to get bored with life at home, with all its safe routines. That's where the trouble really began. Aunt Molly had not really changed since her father's death. She hadn't even learned to read properly. He never went out and had no outside interests. He spent what free time he had listening to the radio, watching the television, especially game shows. The boys, though they loved their mother, wanted to decide more things for themselves. And, like me, they wanted to go out more. Aunt Molly, however, just wanted to stay at home all the time. The boys never went out much with their mother. Whenever they did go out, it was with me and my parents, or with our grandparents. Aunt Molly always stayed at home. It was Winston who thought of taking their mother to the theatre on her next birthday. She'd be 39. The boys planned it all out carefully with the help of the rest of the family. We were all there, my parents and my grandparents. I don't think Mum would like to see a Shakespeare play or anything like that, said Clement, but I'm sure that going to see something would do her good. You're right, said Gran. I think your mother should go to see something she'd enjoy. It would make a nice change for her. Something like those shows she liked on the television. Gran, you're brilliant, said Winston. What about that show on the television with that hypnotist guy? The Maxwell Marvel show? Mum loved that. What's that all about? Asked Grandpa. I don't think I've seen it. You must be the only person in the country who hasn't, said Clement. Maxwell Marvel is an expert hypnotist. He gives people suggestions and orders after he's made them go to sleep. When they wake up, they do all kinds of funny things. Then, at an order from Maxwell Marvel, they go to sleep again. When they wake up again, they can't remember a thing about it. Grandpa laughed. I've had a few evenings like that myself. Gran looked at him. When I was much younger, of course, he added quickly. Mum would really like to see that, though. I just know it, said Winston. Yes, but how do we get your mum on a television show? Won't it be expensive? How will we get the money? I asked. Relax, said Winston. All we have to do is write to the television company and they'll send us the ticket free. That's where they get their live audiences from. All we have to do is make sure we let them know in time for the show. We all agreed that this was a great idea. So, we did it. Aunt Molly, of course, was at first unwilling to go along with it. However, we'd all made the decision for her, and we wouldn't take no for an answer. In her heart, though, she didn't really care what happened to her, not since her dear Dally had gone. But she went along to please her boys, because she cared deeply for them and didn't want to disappoint them. The television studio, the place where the show took place, was not at all what Aunt Molly imagined it would be like. He thought it would be like the inside of a theatre or a cinema. It wasn't. It was full of lighting and sound equipment. There were all kinds of people around whose job it was to make sure that everything worked properly. The audience itself was smaller than he expected. He could see the star of the show, Maxwell Marvel, nervously brushing his jacket in full view of the audience. "Don't worry, Mum," said Winston with confidence. "It's always like this in a television studio. They're just getting ready for the show." Aunt Molly was sitting in the middle of the second row, between the twins. I was there too, along with Grandpa, who from time to time took little drinks from a small bottle of something he kept in his pocket. He was smiling. A man came out and told some jokes to make everybody feel more relaxed. He explained how the show was recorded for television, and what was expected of the audience. Then the lights went down and the opening music for the show started. Maxwell Marvel came into the center of the studio, full of smiles. The audience clapped for a long time. Aunt Molly had seen this show many times on television, so she knew what to expect. Even so, we could tell that she was getting excited. We could see her smiling. It had been a long time since we had seen her smile like that. Then the show began. Maxwell Marvel asked for some people from the audience to be hypnotized. Quite a few of the audience were willing, but only about 10 were chosen. They came onto the small stage and were immediately hypnotized by Maxwell. They were told to do the strangest things, such as behaving like farm animals, dancing at a disco, or acting like famous people. And they did everything they were told to do. Even the quiet-looking ones were persuaded to do things that looked completely different from their usual behavior. Then, at a word or sign from Maxwell, they became themselves again and couldn't remember anything about what they'd done. Some of them didn't even believe that they'd been hypnotized at all, and would only believe Maxwell after they were shown a video of what they'd been doing. Everybody loved it, including Aunt Molly. The final part of the show came when Maxwell asked for a last person to come forward. "Yeah!" shouted Winston. He was pointing at his mother. "Winston, what are you doing?" she said. "I can't do that. I'd die of embarrassment." "Oh, go on, Mum. Say something different." Clement whispered loudly. Grandpa and I were smiling. Aunt Molly smiled too. He felt that she couldn't say no after all the trouble they had taken. What if we did look silly? That wouldn't matter. Nothing mattered now but her boys. "All right, I'll do it," she said. Aunt Molly, for some reason, was an especially easy person to hypnotize. As we sat on it, he went to sleep to the sound of Maxwell's voice like a baby. They all wondered what hypnotic suggestions Maxwell would give her. Then Maxwell turned to Winston and said, "What suggestion would you like to make, young man? I'll tell this lovely lady to do anything that won't get her into trouble with the police." The audience laughed. The twins whispered to each other. Then Winston spoke. "Well, Mum's always needed a bit more confidence. So what could you do to make her more decisive?" said Clement. "That's it," said Winston. "More able to make decisions and be more confident. Let her live life to the full." "Let's see what we can do," said Maxwell. He first asked for her name, and Grandpa told him. Then Maxwell turned to Aunt Molly, who was still fast asleep. "Now, Nellie, you will answer only to my voice. Do you understand?" I understand, said Aunt Molly quietly, though she was still asleep. You will be a confident woman, full of strength. Whatever you want to do, you will succeed in doing. Nothing is too difficult for you. Is that clear to you, Molly? Said Maxwell. Molly said that it was. When I tell you to open your eyes, you will be that intelligent, confident woman. You will live life to the full. You will not remember that you have been hypnotized, but you will be a new, confident woman who will live life to the full. You will continue until I, and only I, tell you to return to your normal life. Is that understood, Molly? Said Maxwell loudly, and with quite a lot of confidence of his own. Molly said she understood. Now, Molly, said Maxwell, open your eyes. But as he said this, he suddenly gave a loud cry and fell at Aunt Molly's feet while holding on to his tie. His face had turned grey. Maxwell Marvel had a heart attack just as Aunt Molly was opening her eyes. The first thing she saw was Maxwell Marvel lying at her feet. She turned to the nearest person in the audience and said, Well, don't just sit there, man. This man has obviously had a heart attack. Call for a doctor and an ambulance at once. He needs immediate attention. The man did as he was told, while Aunt Molly undid Maxwell's tie and put him in a comfortable position. She acted as if she knew exactly what to do. Help soon arrived, and the unconscious Maxwell was taken away in an ambulance. A man from the television company spoke to the audience and explained that because of Maxwell Marvel's sudden and unfortunate accident, the show was at an end. He said he was very sorry that things had been cut short in this way. Somebody behind us called out that it had been the best part of the show. Grandpa went up to the man who had spoken to us. He asked him what they could do to get Aunt Molly back to normal, now that Maxwell Marvel wasn't here. You heard Maxwell, the man told him. Only his voice can undo the orders. I'm sorry, you'll have to wait until Maxwell can speak to her himself. But what if, asked Grandpa, what if he doesn't get better? Let's all hope that he does, the man said. It's a popular show. Anyway, the order he gave her wasn't so bad, was it? It's not as if he told her to start acting like a monkey or something. Don't worry, we'll get in touch. In the car on the way back home, we talked about what had happened that evening. We'd all been surprised, to say the least, at the way Aunt Molly had behaved when Maxwell Marvel had had his heart attack. She'd been more in control than anybody. It was as if she'd known exactly what to do. Nonsense, said Aunt Molly when we put this to her. Just a little common sense. Besides, everything about his condition showed that his attack was not a serious one. He should get better soon if he rests for a while and looks after himself. Was this Aunt Molly talking? We could hardly believe what we were hearing. She sounded like a doctor. How do you know that, Mum? Asked Winston. I heard a radio program all about looking after your heart. It described everything about heart conditions very clearly, she answered. And when exactly did you hear this? Asked Grandpa. 10 years ago, while I was cleaning the carpet. When Danny was alive, bless him, said Molly with a smile. The week that followed Aunt Molly's return home was full of surprises for all of us. She was not the Molly we all knew. For a start, we soon discovered that she could read after all. After years of hardly looking at even a newspaper, she began to read anything she could get her hands on. At first, It was cheap magazines and love stories. Then he started on serious newspapers and rotten novels. During the following weeks, she took up painting and found that she was able to paint beautiful pictures. Soon, he could paint as well as a professional. Then, her beloved cooking came. No longer did she cook simple but delicious meals. Now, he tried Indian, Chinese, and Italian meals, which were also, it must be said, delicious. He started to go out to all kinds of places: museums, art shows, scientific talks given by experts, political meetings, and she took the twins too. "You were complaining that we never went out." "We're going out," she said to them. Nobody dared to advise her any more. "I'm a grown woman. I can do things for myself, thank you very much," she would tell us. Then he came home with Horace, the professor of classics at the university. He was an expert on ancient Greek and Roman history. "Horace had asked me to spend a week in Greece with him. We're going to explore the ancient buildings," she said. "But, Mum," began the twins. "No buts," Molly said. "I'd rather explore an ancient building than look like one. Besides, Horace is a good-looking man, with brains too. He likes me, and I'm still an attractive woman. I could marry again. It's about time I started to live life to the full. I've stayed at home for too long." We were all amazed by this new Aunt Molly. She could, it seemed, do anything she put her mind to. And although we loved the old Aunt Molly, we soon liked this new person who had come into our lives. In fact, she was now a lively, funny, and thoughtful woman. She scared us a little, too, with her burning wish for improvement, but we all found her very, very easy to like. It was 12 weeks after Maxwell Marvel had had his heart attack. We'd heard nothing from him, but we saw on the television that he'd been let out of hospital. 2 days after he left hospital, he was found dead in the bed of his latest 20-year-old girlfriend. He died of another heart attack. He was 49. A week after Maxwell Marvel's death, Grandpa received a letter from the man he'd spoken to at the television studio. There was a taped message with the letter. On the tape was a recording of Maxwell giving the order for Aunt Molly to return to what he had been before. He'd recorded the message just before he left hospital, just before he hurried off to meet his new lover. It had now been a week since Grandpa got the letter. We still haven't played the tape to Aunt Molly. We can't decide what we should do. We discovered another person in Aunt Molly, and we love her too. She's a new Aunt Molly who has rediscovered life. Yet we also love and miss the sweet, kind lady who raised the twins, the old Aunt Molly. The truth is, we don't know which Aunt Molly is now the real one. What would happen if we played her the tape? Would a part of her die once again, as it had seemed to do when Uncle Dalton died? Would it be right for us to take this new life away from her? Then, again, perhaps nothing would happen, and she would remain as she is, full of the love of life. And which Aunt Molly has the most right to be here, the old or the new? Who is the real Aunt Molly? We and Horace are going off to Greece next week. That will give us all time to think things over.